All right. In theory, if StreamYard is not lying to me, we are live on the internet. So hello to all the folks that are watching, if there are any. I can't see a count just at the moment, but hello. And I want to offer a special welcome to Alientude, Kyle, who is joining me for this fun random ramble stream. His channel is linked in the description down below. He rambles about swords on the internet. Highly encourage you to check it out. Kyle, or would you prefer Alientude?
Kyle's just fine.
Kyle, would you throw out some more introductions?
Yeah, so I am a geek who likes swords. Unlike Matthew, I don't really have any training in swords at all, but I am learning as I go. I live out in the middle of nowhere, so there is no training available for me whatsoever. So it's basically me learning about swords and sharing that experience with people as I go. My favorite, if you can see the two sword racks on the wall behind me, you can probably tell that my favorite swords are European, especially long swords, but I do also dabble in katana, Chinese swords, and pretty much any bladed implements.
And you mentioned that you're learning as you're going from when you started making videos to kind of where you are now. Any interesting lessons that you would like to share, or maybe what would you go back and tell yourself when you started this adventure?
First thing, and it's something I still struggle with, is relax. I tense up easily when I'm trying to do something physical and with control, and it's the exact opposite of what you actually want to do. You want to be relaxed. You want to let your muscles do the work, not your joints do the work. And it's why a year and a half ago, I don't remember exactly when, I actually got an elbow injury because I was locking my arms too much. And that took like 6-8 months to heal. And it's something I still struggle with. Like I said, I need to relax more and just be I won't say casual, because swords are dangerous. You want to respect them at all times, but don't tense up.
Yeah. Unclench.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it is a balance. I've also, particularly as I've aged, right? Hyperextended my elbow. That took a long time to heal. If I do something stupid, ideally not with a sword, I don't tend to have many near-death experiences anymore when it comes to the reviewing of videos, but I certainly hurt myself in other ways, like sneezing too hard, and then that can certainly impact things. But I know when I go on camera, it's not so bad, because I feel like the videos that I make are supposed to be about the object and less about me, and inevitably I am the host performing the essay of a review, so to speak. But it's more about the object, right? And so if I'm honest about my skill, then it's not so bad, because it's not a review of my performance as a swordsman. At the same time, I don't know that a review is a great reflection of me as a practitioner, because I'm doing 25 other things, right?
Yes.
And it's tough to appreciate if you haven't tried to film yourself doing something before to put out in front of God and everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because you got cameras, like, did you turn them on? Are they recording? There's not I don't have anything that's particularly elaborate. So, and I have many times forgotten to change the camera or ignored a low battery warning that I'm like, that means there's enough left, and it stops, or my phone is full if I'm using that for slow-mo. And so before I go do this cut where I'm like, oh, this is going to be important, I'm like, oh, is that camera on? Is this one on? Okay. Is it going to fly at my face? Do I have protective gear on? Are my kids put away? Is it going to whack into the car? Did I move that out of the way? There's all of that stuff.
And we live in completely opposite climates. I have to deal with the heat all the time, and cameras overheating nonstop. So it's like I go to do a cut, for instance, on a target, and it's a really good cut. Then I go and look at it, and the camera overheated and didn't get the cut. And it's just so I have to sit there and constantly adjust. And honestly, during summer, I have to basically not do it at all. Or I can do it at like 6 in the morning when it's only 85, 88 degrees. But 6 in the morning, I'm incredibly low energy at the time. So it's not exactly the best time to be going on doing an activity such as that.
That's interesting. I have not had camera overheating. That hasn't been. I think I had, like, when I record on an iPhone, I found that if I just took my case off, that it wasn't like the breeze was enough to let it record for however long the storage would last. But I don't generally overheat, even in the height of summer. But then again, I'm not going out there when it's like 100 degrees. I'm hopefully I've worked ahead enough to hide in my basement during those really hot days. But I don't have months of that time. So there's like a week where it's above 100 and it's incidentally like 80% humidity. It's just miserable outside. And then it drips back down to like 70 and it's got a nice breeze and it's not so bad. So, I do struggle though with having limited time on the weekends, and it's not usually that there's like a hot day and I can't do it. It's that like it's raining or, something else prohibits me from using the free time that I had to cut for actual cutting.
Yeah, well, when you live in the high desert of California, you get most of June, all of July, all of August is over 100 every single day. All of July was over 110. So, the lows are low 80s. So it's tricky.
That does
next
not.
year, next year, I'm going to be doing a lot of cutting in advance so that I have the footage in advance, so I don't have to struggle to find time to cut for my summer reviews.
It's doing things in batches is certainly helpful. So this is like how the sausage is made by two people that like make sausage as a hobby. And I don't know how interesting it is to the people watching, but certainly cutting things in batches, what I find is the reviews I think that I'm the most happy with, where I feel like I've really elaborated on everything of value that I had to add, are usually when I basically just do that one and I devote all my attention to it. I can't do that very often though. And most of the time there's not usually something that I'm like so jazzed about that I feel compelled to do it. So I do batches of things where I'll cut various targets. And sometimes if I'm breaking things, I'll do one or two. Those are a little more intensive and I run out of energy if I do more than two, but I have trouble like collecting all of my thoughts at the end, right? Because I think some of the most beneficial things that a person can add about a sword review, apart from like, here's, some detail about the examples and stuff like that, is the things that don't translate well to like the camera, right? Like, was this loose? Did it shock my hand? Did I feel like I was in control of it while I was moving it around? And if I batch things, like sometimes I'll have footage from, months ago, especially if I'm doing like practicing with a sword, doing EI or something like that with a Japanese sword. And like, I really have to like take notes and be like, what did I think about this so that I can remember those details. Otherwise they get lost. And then I'm, after I put the video, I'm like, oh yeah, there was that thing I wanted to put in and totally forgot. Shit.
There's always that thing, no matter what, no matter how long I ramble in a video. And my reviews have been getting longer and longer recently, but it doesn't matter how much I ramble. I always forget something, always, every single time.
Yeah, I've made videos that I'm sure are pushing an hour and I still don't think I covered everything, right? Like, I don't, for all of the 5 people that watch all the way to the end of a Ramble session like that. But at the same time, it does seem like it helps, right? I'm glad that there are more sword reviews out there now than there used to be. And I always think back on the swords that I bought and was fundamentally disappointed in. And if somebody had just said like, hey, this is poopy, like maybe I would have saved $1,000.
Yeah.
What got you into reviewing swords?
So I bought a couple Cult of Athena mystery boxes, and I wanted to just kind of post some thoughts about them. And it was they were very rudimentary thoughts because I was very new to swords at the time. I'd had one sword, a Windless Raptor, a fantasy sword, for like 10 years. But then I really decided to start getting into it. And that's when I bought that mystery box. And I just kind of wanted to post some thoughts about it, about the different swords I got. And even though my thoughts were very rudimentary, I enjoyed writing about them, because at the time I was just writing on the Sword Buyer's Guide forum. So then I moved to, hey, I have a few other swords. Let me write my thoughts on them. And I've always had an itch to be creative, even if I am not artistic in the slightest. So what that itch has either been, what was that?
You're not giving yourself enough credit. Come on.
Well, I can visualize things very well, but if I try to put them to paper, like actual drawing, or it doesn't have to be paper, digitally, it doesn't come out. But I've always been creative in terms of like either writing or like playing Dungeons and Dragons, dungeon mastering, that kind of thing. So this scratched that itch in a way that I hadn't done before. And it wasn't a long trip from writing some reviews to saying, videos would really help showcase what I'm talking about. And then from there, it just snowballed. Yeah.
I don't know that mine started out of anger. I've told this story a few times, but I got a sword that I wasn't happy with, and that prompted collecting, which prompted doing some written reviews, which prompted doing a video one. And I got lucky with somebody willing to send me something to do, something that inspired me to take on video work, because it wasn't something that I was particularly passionate about. At the same time, like, I think a lot of people are like, I don't want my face on the internet. That's forever. And that's a good cautionary tale. That's a good sense to have. Because I mentioned I've been told to die from cancer of the ass more times than I would like, but I don't, like, I can take it, generally speaking. Not that it feels good.
It doesn't feel good.
But at the same time, I think there's more positives and negatives, and I can focus on that and still find it to be of value. I found when I posted on written reviews on various sword forums, because not that I did anything on my armory, but Sword Buyer's Guide and Sword Forum International were both relatively active when I started in the community. And I find that the people on Sword Buyer's Guide check out YouTube, but I don't think that most of the people on YouTube check out Sword Buyer's Guide, right?
Yeah.
So it felt like an easier thing to do, even though there are a fair number of people on Sword Buyer's Guide that are like, I cannot listen to you drone on for 20 minutes. You got to make something more concise. But it's really hard to be concise.
It's really hard to get all the points across in just a short video.
I experimented with doing shorts, like kind of the Cliff Notes version of a sword review in shorts, and honestly it worked pretty well. I don't think I didn't see that less people were watching the full review or that more people were, but I think it appealed to a different audience. It didn't making shorts didn't lead to making to other people watching longer content. And I think vice versa, but it did attract a different viewer than I typically see.
Yeah, I
really
tend
hard
to
don't like them. It's really hard to make them.
I tend to do 1 minute review shorts for all my reviews. I miss one or two here or there, but what I notice from them is that they definitely draw a different audience that I don't think really translates to the full reviews, but it doesn't hurt. And generally I find them pretty quick to put together because it's only a minute of video editing. The hardest part is trying to get enough points across to be interesting without just saying, look, just watch the full video.
I made a long video. It's over there. Go watch it. That's the concise version. I hear you. I struggle with that side of things as well. I found the funny ones tend to be fun to make. I enjoy the challenge of like a new medium and like, how can I be helpful? Like, how can I make something that's worthy of somebody's time? But I struggle with it. It's hard to do because I'm not particularly interested in shorts. But I find that the humorous ones are the better ones, but I have to be in a mood to be funny to make them. I can't just like, it's another nuance of putting yourself on camera, is if you're kind of pissy, like that translates. And you're like, people want to watch to like have some levity in their lives. They're not, they're not like, I want to watch this curmudgeon be mad at life.
Yeah. It's you definitely put a face on, put a mask on to some degree, but at the same time, the less of that you can do, the more real you can be. I think the better everything comes out. So it's a weird dichotomy, kind of.
Yeah, the mask I think requires some level of acting. It reminds me of, you know, how like when your mom would be mad at you, but then get a phone call and then like it'd be like and, oh hi, you know, like it's kind of that, but I don't. Especially when you ramble for 20 minutes, and if you're recording like that, the 20 minutes that a person sees, if they choose to watch that long, is not the like, you know, hour to 3 hours of recording that you might have that you have to sort through, and going through and like editing yourself with a pissy face on, you're like, you know, it's a nuance that's not particularly fun. I can appreciate the challenge that goes into it.
Yeah, it's the video editing I find by far the most exhausting part of the entire review process. It's just, you know, it's so much nitty gritty, you know, frame by frame at times, just lots of detail, and generally isn't fun. You listen to yourself repeat the same points over and over and over and over and over, and
if only you were more of a narcissist, right? And then you just love to hear yourself talk.
Well, yeah.
Yep, I imagine that's a barrier that a lot of people run into as well. The first video that I made, I had help from somebody at work that did like a lot of video editing at work. And stylistically, I think it's funny because like the first video I made was like, you know, in terms of old YouTube amateur days, had a level of polish on it that then like immediately dipped down when I started doing it myself. And gradually, as the equipment and understanding's gotten better, it's still probably hasn't quite approached that level yet, but it's a challenge to video edit. And there's something to be said about having to sit there and like, in order for your words to match what's on the screen, you have to listen to yourself say the same thing 7 times in a row. And one time is too many, you know, like it's tough to listen. I can imagine somebody sitting down playing it back and be like, there's no reason I should have any friends. I quit.
Yeah. And then my wife is in the other room having to listen to that the entire time also, because her room's just on the other side of this wall. So she has to listen to my reviews repeated over and over and over. And then she still watches them when I post them on YouTube. So
that support.
Yeah.
Do you find that people outside of, you know, the people that watch you on YouTube and like people in your real life are like, hey, I saw this video that you made?
No. Nobody I have one friend who actually is aware in real life, who is aware that I have a sword YouTube channel. I have friends who know about that I collect swords, but most of them would never come across it ever. And I don't think they would particularly understand it either. So I just don't ever bring it up, really.
I don't know at what point it started happening. It's not a frequent event, but like my boss, for example, was like, hey, I saw your video. And I was like, why? Well, they're like, yeah, you talked about swords. I'm like, yeah, it's not for you. It's not like, I mean, you can, but why? Why would you do that to yourself? If you want to talk to me about something interesting, you can just talk to me anytime. You pay me to do it.
Yeah, I can't imagine any of my coworkers stumbling across my videos. They know I collect swords also. They think it's a weird but interesting hobby, but don't I can't see them ever going on YouTube and finding a sword review and happening to stumble across one of mine. Suppose it could happen, but
Would you be embarrassed? Would you be like, ugh?
No. Well, it depends. Is it one of my early videos where, like you said, they I can't particularly be proud of them, even though I understand that they're all part of the journey.
They are all part of the journey. Have you thought about like taking any of them down? Are they too embarrassing? And you're like,
I don't want to take them down. The most I would do is maybe do a re-review of a sword that was one of my early ones or something like that. But no, I wouldn't take them down. I think they're good for posterity of my own sake, and I can always go back to them and say, "Hey, look, you've come a long way."
It's a long way. Relax. Don't turn into Hulk smash when you go cutting. When you look at your earlier reviews, what would you say is kind of where you've gained the most ground?
Being comfortable in front of a camera, because for the first year or so, I wrote out my scripts entirely and recorded them just audio, and completely did pictures and video on top of that with me just narrating in the background. And that required that was me not speaking as naturally as I wanted to, because that's not the way I speak when I'm reading something. And then also it required an enormous amount of decent video and decent photography of the sword, and that required just too much work, frankly. So those videos that were more like 8 to 12 minutes were oftentimes more work than the ones I'm doing now that are 30 minutes, because it required just collecting so very much footage of the sword.
There are some tricks. There are some tricks I can. I don't want to bore everyone with how sausage is made, but there's some tricks to B-roll that I can share with you. Not to say that it isn't still work, but there's a way to turn 15 seconds into 60 seconds.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've certainly played around with that kind of stuff too.
I'll hop over to questions because I've been neglecting the chat. We do things live so people can comment, and then I disregard anything they have to say for the better part of an hour. That's more or less how it works when you come to one of my lives. But I will try to get the chat in advance when I have a guest. Please, well, even if I don't, I suck at chat. Apologies in advance, but I will try to answer any of the questions. If you have anything, throw it in there, and we'll see if we can get them answered, especially if you have any questions for Kyle. Chris is asking, what is that constellation behind you? My blinky lights. These are some lights that used to be somewhere else in my house, and my wife said, I'm going to put them here. And I was like, neat. They have like little bulby things in the background. They don't like stretch quite enough, but it's just a light on a stick, and then a lot of them. It's a good thing I don't review lights.
It is appropriate that Chris would ask you about a constellation, though.
It is. He's a rocket surgeon. Chris, incidentally, Sterling Armory makes good swords, has a YouTube channel. You should check it out, and also go buy swords from him.
Let's see. Top one up there, next one down, and one of the ones over, third one from the top are all Sterling Armory by Chris. So I have one more over here. So I am a big fan of Chris's work. I highly recommend picking something up from him if you can.
I've liked all the swords that I've gotten to play with from Chris, but one really stood out in my mind as just like an not odd feeling, but really special feeling in my hand. And that was, I believe, a Type 18B that he made. And I talked about it in the review I made of it, but it was one of the largest swords that I've held that made me feel like I could perform surgery delicately. Like if I needed to just like, nip a nose hair, like it was dexterous enough to feel like I could tweeze something with this giant sword. It was quite, that's very uncommon.
Yeah.
I'll say, to feel like you can maneuver and have that much control with a sword that still weighs 3 pounds. It's interesting what dynamics can do, and Chris impressed me with that one. Not that the others aren't impressive, but that one stood out as like just kind of not what I expected at all.
Yeah, I've discussed this with other sword friends that I feel like Chris has a very similar style to Angus Trim, where he has just incredible handling in his swords with his own style, but not. It's a bit more of a modern style than you would get from, like, say, an Albion or Valiant Armory, but not as utilitarian as an Angus Trim sword, which is pretty much aesthetics are the least concern of Gus. And Chris puts a bit more into the aesthetics, and I think recently he's been putting even more into it. So, I'm just a big fan. I love. I've yet to pick up a sword of his that I did not immediately really want to own.
I do have the ugliest sword in my possession that he's ever touched, and that is more to find out next April, I guess. What?
Anathar.
That's right. All right. Fat Ginger Cat. Do any of you own a Gladius? So what do you think about them? I'm thinking about buying one.
I'll answer that to start at least. I don't, but I want to buy the Albion Pedite. 2 years ago at SoCal Sword Fight, they had one at their booth, and it was one of those swords I picked up, and it felt instantly intuitive. You just knew in the hand exactly what the sword would do, how to use it, and I just loved it. I didn't have the money at the time, or I would have bought it right then. But my very tentative plan is to put an order in for that probably beginning of next year. So eventually I will get a Gladius, but no, I don't have one.
I've come close to buying an Albion many times. There's been a few secondhand. There was one on Craigslist for like $400, and I couldn't convince the person that was selling it that I was not trying to scam them. No matter what I did, they would not. They were like, no. As soon as they found out that I was not in the state, and I was like, I can find somebody in your state to pick it up and give you cash, but like, it won't be me that picks it up. I'm not a scammer. Here's my dumb face on the internet. Like, I talk about swords, but it didn't work out. I've had a Cold Steel. I've had Gladiuses, I think, that don't count as a Gladius. And I have held at Albion some of the same, at least a few of the variety that they offer. But I think if I were to buy one, I'd be kind of really tempted to order one from Mark Morrow. He's a swordsmith that makes Japanese. Well, unfortunately, I don't see many of his wares come up secondhand, but he's a pretty talented swordsmith and also has like really competent grinding and angles and an understanding of what a sword should do. And for a while, he was making Japanese style swords, and he gained some notoriety, and that's how I heard of him. But I guess his like focus is on making Gladius, so that's what he does a lot of. And so I've held a few of his swords and always been really impressed. And if you can make a Japanese sword well, then it gives me hope that you'd make something pretty cool in terms of a Gladius. But I think he does all like the fittings, and it comes fully mounted and stuff like that, or comes with a scabbard with all the appropriate adornments and whatnot. So that's kind of where I would lean. But last I checked, they were like $1,200 or more. And I'm given it's not my main shtick, I've just haven't quite done it, though. There's been a number that have been tempting, I should say.
And I will point out a little self-plug here. I did review the Albion de Curio Spatha. If you want to go to my channel and check that review out. That was from a loan from a friend who also, I believe it is Mark Morrow that he has a Spatha from that he absolutely loves. So that's a name that I would like to buy something from at some point as well.
Yes, it is. I haven't seen his. I haven't gotten to hold one, but I think he makes good stuff. So that would be the direction that I would go. But in short, I don't really have anything good to show, which is unfortunate because it's a cool kind of sword, and I'd like to swing it around and whack it into things. You should do a review, a sober review, then a drunk review. You should do a double review, a sword review and a drunk review. You want to take the sober part, Kyle? Or would you
Well,
prefer the drunk one?
well, since I don't really drink, yeah, I would do the sober review.
I'm trying to dial it back a little bit myself. I'm old, and now alcohol seems to have a longer lasting effect and more detrimental to work the calories off. So, not that I'm avoiding it, but I don't know that as often as I talk about swords. I'll probably get around to making a drunk review eventually again. Though it's worth noting that the last time I made a drunk review, I'm pretty sure I soured the relationship with the vendor that sent me the thing. I did it the last time I did a drunk review. It was on a Honshu Wakizashi, and it performed in a way that was like comical. And so it's like, all right, well, I can at least make something funny. So I made a normal review, but I also made a drunk one, and I don't think that made anyone particularly happy, other than the people that like drunk reviews. They seemed to be happy about it, but it meant less Bud K related items will likely show up on the channel. We need to get our reviews going very different from your guys' reviews, but just time into Tommy needed. Good luck with that. So Chris is going to be a sword reviewer, sword maker, and astrophysicist,
And sword computer.
Yep. Let's just all the time. I don't like you're going to have to forget about sleep. You got to invent that that 24-hour energy drink, and then you should be good, so long as it doesn't make your heart explode. Then you'll have time to do all the things, Chris. All right. Beautiful collection behind you. So many crosses. You have no orb problem like Matt does. I think my glowy bulby things, my little, it looks like my wings are growing back or something. It's not making any fans. But your sword collection, impressive. You don't have the problem of needing to get lumber racks to hold them yet. So
not yet. This is just my favorites on these two racks. I have more scattered and a closet right behind the camera that is starting to overflow, and I'm starting to figure out what I need to do to organize it better. I'm probably going to put up a piece of lumber and some hooks to start hanging swords on the wall in there, just because I need. I'm sick of them lying on the floor.
Yeah, I remember. It's funny when I do like sword rack related videos and stuff, because people will ask like, who has that problem? And I'm like, well, I mean, enough people that reach out and are like, thank you, I didn't think about that. Like, there's enough people with swords tucked in a closet that they can't get at easily, that the idea of like, lumber racks, that actually works out. I can fold them, like, okay. We all get there when we've collected long enough. Do you find that you sell and trade? Like, do you move them along, or when something enters your collection, is it a little bit more permanent?
So my attitude towards that is I keep what I love, and if I like it, I generally end up selling it, because I want my permanent collection to be the ones that I really connect with and just absolutely love owning. If it's just it's like, yeah, I like the sword, I'd rather get some of the money back to try to find something I'm going to love.
Do you find that you have a better idea of what you will love, or are there things that surprise you?
I am constantly being surprised about what I love. And for a while there, I thought I was mostly going to focus my collection on long swords, and now I'm finding that I'm falling in love with arming swords and just wanting to get a wide variety of them. So it's always changing.
I still am often surprised, despite, I mean, there's plenty of swords that I don't talk about very often, or that don't enter my collection very often. The Gladius that was just brought up, right? And they're relatively prolific swords in the reproduction market that I just don't see very often. But I would say there's very often things that still kind of take me back. When LK Chen sent items out, like seeing some of those. A few of them really stood out to me as like, oh, I don't think as a collector I ever really had an interest in like the Magnificent Chujian stands out as one that just made me smile when I was swinging it around, right? Like I really enjoyed that sword quite a bit. I thought it looked good. There's a lot to like about it, but if I wasn't reviewing it, I don't think like I would ever go out and look at it for myself. The Hanwei, is it Jin? I can't remember. The billet piece. I mean, I remember seeing that and thinking it was stupid. and then getting one and being like, oh, well, this is actually very cool. Like some of that stuff can be surprising. There can be things that you really expect you're going to think are not going to resonate with you that then do. And
yeah,
no matter how much experience you have, it seems to still plenty of room for surprises. Can you get cheap dead boars from Florida? That's the question. That'd be a great target. For me, no. I guess I haven't ever looked to order them from Florida personally, but the closest I've seen is like a pig carcass from like a Costco or something. It's about $400. You can eat it afterwards, but that's, I don't know how much my wife is going to appreciate what I have to do to it with a sword. It falls in the dirt and stuff. I'm not sure how well that's going to go over. So it seems like a great way to not completely throw away the target that you're cutting, but to also probably waste a lot of meat and get a lot of bad cuts you wouldn't like to eat with machine oil kind of mixed in there, because that's what I coat my swords with. Well, I don't know. Have you looked into that, Kyle?
No, and I can't say I'm particularly enamored with the idea. I've done a little bit with like a pork roast, just to see what kind of how something would stab into it. But even just doing that, it's hard keeping it from getting filthy. And now I live in the desert, so I have sand everywhere, and sand gets everywhere. So if I have what's that?
So says Anakin, right?
Yes, I hate sand. Yes. So if something falls, and if I'm cutting a piece of meat, it's going to end up falling. It's going to get sand everywhere, and that's just not hygienic at all. And I don't want to eat it.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fun to find in your food. Yeah, so I would say that the idea of cutting flesh and like using it as a medium to convey effectiveness of a sword is interesting. At the same time, if I had access to it, hypothetically, I could get a carcass for the same price as a tatami mat. It wouldn't necessarily be bad. Like then I'd probably consider it. But even tatami is very expensive to get effectively 8 cuts a mat on. I mean, it's basically like you're buying a bag of golf balls that you only get to hit once. It's $1 a swing or more. So that's a premium, and the carcasses, as interesting as they are, I don't know. They provide value, but I don't know if like I could justify it, because do bear in mind that like the income side of things from YouTube, I'm gonna guess for you as well, Kyle, is not particularly above. Like I'm definitely in the red. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like
yeah.
if I cut a tatami mat, then that video is in the red. I won't make as much money from that video. I'm not complaining, but
around 6 months ago, somebody was asking me about that. So I went through and did the crunched numbers based on how much money YouTube had given me, and then added in the value of the review samples I had got. And I worked out to getting less than a cent an hour for all the amount of effort. So yeah, it is not a lucrative hobby.
It's not going to make you millions, and I'm not complaining about it. I enjoy doing it. I'm not suggesting that there's any boohoo for me, but the idea of a carcass being really expensive, and assuming that the recovery of the meat is not going to be 100%, and then I'm also not going to have a lot of pork, that maybe I want a little bit more variety. It's hard to justify. I think a closer compromise that I've noodled on for a long time has been ballistic gel. I don't know if you've thought about doing that, Kyle.
I did, and I looked at it for a little bit, and from what I found, it goes bad relatively quickly, and it takes a ton of gelatin to make, which ends up again being not cheap to end up making. The one that I've heard that is actually a pretty good target is clay, if you can get a nice pure clay. But I again have the problem with it's going to fall off. I cut a piece off, it falls and lands in sand, and now I have sand in my clay. And that's not something you want to cut into because that will absolutely scratch up or even chip your swords.
That is going to give you a lot of scratchy swords. Yeah, just kind of cutting into sandpaper. Bird says, my agent told me if I can't do sword reviews, then I'll never make it in Hollywood. That's yeah, you gotta make it here first doing sword reviews. That's if the plan was to use sword reviews as a stepping stone, Bird, then I question your strategy. That's
I want to know what agent takes on a sword reviewer.
Daniel, one thing I have in mind that I'd love to hear your thoughts on: what methods for coping with wanting a new sword but knowing you should not obtain one at the time. How do you cope?
How do I cope is, well, first I don't ask my wife about it because she is an enabler and she will say, yeah, go ahead and buy it. So I have to remind myself not to do that. What I try to do is stop looking at the sword I want to buy and start playing around with the swords I have and reminding myself that I have other swords that I don't have enough time to play with already. So if I don't have the money, I need to not spend money I don't have.
I'm trying to think of how I cope. I just go lay on a giant pile of beautiful swords and just imagine, if you can get the mental picture of like a supermodel on a bed of money, now just imagine me on a bed of sharp objects. And that's basically how it I'm sorry to everyone who has a mental image. I sincerely apologize. That was an image you didn't need, but I generally have my hands full. So there's a lot of swords that I see that I want, and that there's definitely no shortage there. But I also think about like, oh my God, from my perspective, I am already very heavily invested, more financially than I would like to be in a sword collection. And what happens is I get them to review things, and then I focus on other things, and my collection constantly takes a backseat, and it gradually grows and grows and grows, and I never offload anything. And then that's scary. And that, I think the size of it, the fact that I had to like buy a bigger house and put up lumber racks means that like it's easier for me to say no now. The thing that gets me though is that there are some times that I look back on swords and I was like, oh, I was really stupid for not buying that. And there's a number of examples that come to mind, lots and lots of them. And so I think generally speaking, I'm pretty cautious, and I do okay, like in terms of moderating, but there are times where I absolutely wish that I had forked over the money, and it really would have worked out well. Do you have a few that got away, Kyle?
There's one available right now that I am telling myself to stop, not to buy. It's one of the Witcher swords by Kair Morin Forge.
Kair Morin Forge, yeah.
Yeah, that is. I don't even think he's doing them anymore. I know he took a break for military service and he's never returned. So it's available right now, and I want it, and I can't afford it, so I have to keep telling myself not to. But in terms of one that got away, I actually own it now because I had worked. A guy was selling it, and actually, let me grab it real quick.
Sword show and tell.
So it's this one. It's a customized by Jeffrey Robinson, and it was for sale on the Sword Buyer's Guide about 2 years ago. And I tried to work a trade for it, and I couldn't get the trade to work. And the guy who was selling it said, "I'll let you, if you want to buy it from me, I will hold on to it for you for a month, and you can buy it." And I said, "I don't know if I'll have the money in a month." I was selling a few swords, but they weren't selling right then. So I was like, I can't commit to buying that when I don't have the money. But one of my swords sold. I had the money, messaged him. He sold it to somebody else 1 hour before I had messaged him. And the guy he sold it to happened to be a friend of mine. So I told him, if you ever sell that sword, give me first shot. And last year he sold it to me. So I got it. It's one of the most beautiful swords in my collection, in my opinion.
No regrets then?
No regrets at all. I love this sword. I still need to review it. I have not gotten around to that yet, but I have too many swords I have not yet reviewed.
This is the problem of the prolific collecting sword reviewer guy.
And this is not complaining at all. And the review samples and people wanting me to review their swords. It's like, yes, I want to. I also want to review my own swords.
That I figured that like I don't feel like I'm in a big enough. My britches are big enough to say no, right? Like if somebody is willing to lend me Swordfin Daniel, great example, ask her the question, right? Let me a Perna Denal sword to review, and like I don't think I'm a big enough channel to say no to like the opportunity to check out something that like I didn't have to pay for, right? So if it's a vendor that sends me something, then they have some skin in the game, and I try to be respectful of the fact that like they've sent me something, I didn't pay for it, but they're also getting something out of it. But when it's a private sword citizen, so to speak, then I tend to put those at the top of the pile because that's, they're not getting anything out of it other than hearing me blab about it, and that doesn't seem like a great trade, frankly. So
I agree.
So I try to put those at the top, but then inevitably my stuff takes a back seat, and then it piles up. It is, not that I don't enjoy it, but I get it. You want to review your own stuff. Got some stuff to talk about. Do you buy swords just to review, or do you buy them with the idea of collecting them and then?
Generally speaking, what I find is I will buy budget swords specifically for review and keep a few of them, and usually end up moving them on though. But I definitely, especially on the second-hand market, if I see somebody selling something at a good price that is, a few $100s, I think that could be a good sword to review. I will oftentimes buy it.
And then when you buy a sword and you're like, all right, review it, does that, because that in a sense is not like something you're going to keep and have infinite time to review, does it motivate you to get it done quicker because it's money that
I wish I could say yes, but no, it doesn't, because I have multiple swords in the closet that I bought specifically for review, and they just keep getting pushed back and back and back. And it's like, I don't know yet if I'm going to keep them, because generally speaking, when I don't, if I'm not actively working on my review for the sword, I try not to use it too much, because I don't want my opinions to be formed and then months later go to review and be like, I don't even remember why I have these opinions about this sword. So I want to go into my review process pretty fresh.
That's not a bad way to go. Notes. I mean, I do find that notes will help me about, because you've done enough of them now that like you kind of at least have an idea of what you think makes a good or a bad sword, or what to look for, or what, if it's not there, is also important. Like right. You've whacked around enough things where if you take notes on some of those, but still, I've definitely had swords that I've used, paused on, come back to, and been like, well, what the hell? What's that mean? What was it? what did I write that for?
Yes.
That's not fun. And then you have to end up spending more time with it. All right. More. Oh God, I suck so bad at chat. What's a sword that you're, well, I'm looking for somebody who's asking a question. What's a sword that you would love to buy today?
A sword that I would love to buy today.
Yep.
Yes, all of them. Like I said, that Witcher sword from Kaer Forge is the one I'm currently debating internally and telling myself, no, don't buy it. You can't afford it. I would love to get something like, I would love to see what a really high-end katana is like. I've got high-end examples of European swords, quite a few of them. But the highest end katana I have would be a toss-up between a Zisei, an older Zisei that I have that is going to be coming up for review 6 months or so, I think, and Hanwei Ronin katana that I just bought secondhand fairly recently. And then I also have experience with one Howard Clark L6 katana, but that is so far beyond everything else that it doesn't really, it's not a good comparison. I would like to see what a production sword in the Albion range, maybe like a Motohara or something like Rado swords, something like that. A handcrafted katana that is not at the level of Howard Clark.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, fortunately, there's a lot of them out there. They do tend to be a little bit more on the pricey side, though.
Yeah.
Like a high-end Albion, the museum line from Albion, starts to cap out around 4,000, somewhere in there. But that's more or less where like custom swords start in the Japanese realm. In fairness, there's they usually come with a scabbard. It's not usually as ornate as something from DBK or something, but it can be very, very elaborate depending on what's done. And that's a worthy thing to look at. Those, honestly, they come up for sale secondhand, and you have to have kind of cash in hand and the ability to walk away. But as I think back on some of the examples that really I wish I had bought, there were finished Japanese swords. Two of them are border watches. One was a Christian Fletcher border watch with an Albion blade, and the other was a Angus trim blade. And both of those are on my wish I had bought them list. They got away from me. The sword's really cool, and I had an opportunity to buy one at what it wasn't like a particularly thrifty deal, but those tend to hold their value pretty well. And I could have experienced all the joy of those swords with very little risk to myself, and I was too cowardly to do it. But the other ones that stand out are finished Japanese swords, and two of them that come to mind were under $2,000 and finished, and were made by Walter Sorrells, and they were for sale on the forums like 10 years ago. I can't stop kicking myself, right? But since we're on the verge of another recession, who knows what'll happen, because this was, I think, around 2000, like sometime post 2008, when people were just getting rid of stuff in the market for high-end custom swords fell through the floor. And so these were swords that were probably $10,000 to finish, but were on sale for $2,000, and I didn't get them. But they come up every now and again. You'll find on eBay a pretty stellar deal on a Rick Barrett sword or some other high-end finished sword that's completed, and they come up, and people just kind of want them away. Or if you can find somebody to finish them, what also happens is people buy a sword blade, and they have this, in their mind's eye, they have this version of a sword that they'll use because they're very interested in the art at the time, or something captures their interest. But inevitably what happens with Japanese swords is, because there's usually many hands or craftsmen that are involved in the making, they all have queue times, lives, things happen, and some of them are more infamous for taking longer than expected. And by the time people get their sword, they don't want them anymore. So sometimes you can buy those for a song. but they come up. You just have to not, not buy the Kaer Morhen sword and have discretionary income at the ready when that sword comes up, and then you can find them though. Every now and again, I still get lucky. But so high-end katana, that's a worthy thing to look at. Do you think, knowing what you know now, that you'd be able to effectively evaluate like what makes it high-end or not?
I would hope so. I think so. I think I have learned enough, especially learned enough from budget katana, what is most common on budget katana, the flaws that you see. I mean, they're almost all of them are from Longchuan, and I don't even know how many forges there are making them, but there's not that many. So they all tend to have very similar blades, and very similar fittings and similar mounting styles. And I think I have enough, but I guess I won't know until I get to experience it.
That's fair. It dawns on me that Hanwei and to some extent Zisei, and I heard that they're going to close down shop soon or something like that. But Hanwei, not that they're perfect, but to their credit, they have a lot of variety in the blade shapes, right? They have little bitty skinny ones with little bitty skinny scabbards, and they have big chunky boys and big chunky scabbards. And a lot of the stuff out of Longchuan tends to be, very, very similar in profile. Like they all have to fit the same dimension of habaki. And so you get some variation so long as it fits that habaki, but you don't see a lot of variation outside of that. But Hanwei is the one that stands out as something that does. So like the Ronin you said you bought recently from Hanwei is probably to some degree at least different than.
There's a lot of differences in terms of how it's mounted to the budget Longchuan katana. And, from what I understand, Hanwei in general their QC has slipped since their factory fire, from what their reports are online. But even with that, there's very real differences. You can definitely see it, especially in the Tsukamaki. It's just the Ito wrapping is so much better than what you normally see on budget katana.
The variation is something that always got me about Hanwei, because sometimes they really seem to nail it, and sometimes they really seem to miss it. But I'll wait for the review. It's just 6 months away, right?
That one's probably even longer. I don't know. I'm not sure if I have. I have a tentative schedule, and it's always being modified.
Organizing my sock drawer, posting this review. Got it sorted. Alientude has more swords than Matt. What?
No, I don't.
Sure. I'm not sure.
No, I don't. Not at all.
Might not look like it with the background, because I've got little glowy orbs instead of swords, but each glowy orb represents 12 swords, maybe. What do you up to? How many?
I probably have around 40 to 50 swords at this point, I think. You have several hundred.
Yeah, not several hundred, but
okay.
I believe I have under 200.
Okay.
I think.
Still multiple times as many as me.
Yeah, under.
But you've been collecting a lot longer.
I have. It's part of it. Like if I include the broken ones, then the number goes up pretty substantial. Well, not a huge amount, but there's probably another 60 broken ones or something around, and then but so I have a couple more, but they are in the closet on the lumber racks, and I don't usually record from there, so that's why you don't see them. Kyle has the good sense to put up his favorites in dolled up positions behind him instead of filming in front of a lumber rack or just a couple.
And that's my work computer. I work from home, so whenever I'm feeling stressed at work, I can just look up and admire my swords.
It's not a bad strategy. I work from right here, so it's not something you can see, but there's basically just like a wall of screens that go around me off camera. But if I look that way, there's swords, and if I look that way, there's a closet full of swords, and then if I turn around that way, there's swords, and so it also helps to keep me sane. Most people have like pictures of their kids. We set rooms full of swords. That's is there one that you take out more often than any other one? You know, that not necessarily your favorite, but you find yourself kind of ogling a little bit more?
The newest one, whatever that is.
Just the newest one. Doesn't have to be like the fanciest one. You don't like take out that custom Albion with the Jeffrey Robinson.
I mean, I take them out every month to oil them, but no, I it's whatever catches my eye. But it does tend to be whatever's the newest one, because I will have handled it less, so I will want to remind myself how it feels.
Is there a one that is your favorite that you couldn't get rid of?
I don't know that I could get rid of any of the ones up on my wall right now.
No.
I don't know if I could. I mean, that's absolute emergency. But if I had to choose, probably the let's see, that one, Damian Solosky Golden Dream, which is also my most expensive one right now.
So if a fire happens, you're going to do your best to get your arm under and take as many from that side as you can?
Yes.
I gotcha. That I get asked that a lot. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't want to put myself in that position.
It's hard to, well, I do have a favorite, but like my favorite doesn't make sense, more or less. That's have you guys ever thought about doing a display cabinet akin to a museum display? I'm planning one now and building in a couple weeks. Wonder if I should film the whole thing. Yes, you should, Chris. You are a YouTuber, sir, and that is content right there.
That's good content.
Yeah, I've thought about honestly, the display case is not something I've gone after. And that's more or less because like I've tried to sequester my collection and keep it up and away from kids. And not that I mind displaying it, but like I haven't really pursued like a high-end case like a museum because I want to grab them and touch them, right? So accessibility has been more important. And I like to have them like near while I'm working, so that they've always been like in kind of some sort of quasi together pile. And I'll keep a few of them scattered around, like more useful ones. Like I have, call it the 12-foot rule, if you will. But generally speaking, most of my collection is in one piece, in one place, and most of it is accessible. So I can take it off, I can easily clean it. But it's also high up so that my kids can't touch it. And so the display side of things is really how do I get like more of them to be on the wall and pretty, you know, or at least not like ugly. And that's been a little bit more of a focus than a museum case. But not to say that wouldn't be cool. It's like I could totally see how most people have like a recess for a TV. You're like, no, swords.
Yeah, I would like to do something like that sometime, but I am not handy and not crafty at all. So it would need to be something I would pay somebody to make, and that's the kind of money that could go into buying another sword.
It's something you constantly have to wrestle with, right? In fairness though, not that I'm particularly crafty, but if I attempt to make a sword rack, I found that Enzo Workshop could make them for the same price as I could buy the materials for. And they did certainly a better job, than I did. So I've been pretty happy with the display behind me in particular. It's one that has like 3 racks on it. And so I don't know how well it would work for European swords because it kind of has a wide area that a katana would fit in, and they're pretty tightly spaced so that it works well with that style of sword. But like I think that's great. They tend to look neat, and I can grab them all, and they're presentable and stuff like that. So I've kind of actually moved away from doing some of that work myself, because it's just cheaper to have somebody else do it. They were able to make a better product than the price of the wood that if I were to buy it from Lowe's and do it myself. So
yeah, wood's not cheap.
it's not. And the downside, like, I have the tools, right? So the funny part is, like, I would spend more than $150 on wood to get something like wide. Then I'd have to take a jigsaw. And even though I have the tools and the blades and the sanders and all of the like abrasives to actually make the stuff, that's not like factored in the cost. Just the raw materials would cost me more than what Enzo Workshop was charging for a finished product that is done to a higher level than I would do it. In fairness, they didn't use like one solid piece of oak, which is what I'm pricing it against. But I wouldn't take the time to glue smaller pieces together and then like, I don't have that'd be more of a pain in the ass. So yeah, I thought it was funny that when I was like pricing out making the same thing they were doing, I was like, oh, they can make it and ship it from halfway across the world cheaper than I can buy the wood here. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you're doing a full museum display case, yes, I would like to see it. I'd like to see how it comes out. Some people make some pretty nifty sword displays, and I do get a little bit jelly. And then when I'm like, hey, honey, what do you think about putting this up? She's like, do you want to stay married? Yes, ma'am. No, she doesn't say that, but she does with her eyes.
It's it's the subtext you have to read.
Yeah, but I've been married for more than 20 years. I'm not a master of the subtext, but I can kind of get by. Tell me stay married as long as I have. All right. I'm missing a lot of stuff in chat. I am so far behind. I didn't imagine Matt naked on a bed of swords. Unfortunately, a moment later. Yes. I highlighted this comment to bring it right back. If that thought escaped you, now it's right back in there. All right. I'm going to go to the bottom of chat so that I'm quasi caught up. And I'm apologizing in advance if I've missed your question. Feel free and ask it again so I can hopefully not miss it again. Yes, I heard Z-Say is closing, and I pinged them on Facebook and asked if they were closing, and they said, unfortunately, yes. I don't have any other information, though. I asked why, and I didn't hear back from them about it yet.
I think it's because PayPal did PayPal things and screwed them over. And they no longer want to deal with that, with trying to figure out payment from outside of China. I think they're still going to produce swords and sell them in China.
That's unfortunate. It is also a risky business, like, even if you don't have anything, like, any reason to doubt a company, the idea of like an international wire transfer and then hold your breath is a risky thing for a customer to take on. John, RVA Katana's in here. This might be an opportunity for you to step in and be a distributor for Z-Say as well.
That's a good idea.
You can talk sense into him and say, how about we sell your stuff and do it that way. Solving all the problems here, which is unfortunate. Yes, I like their stuff, and if it's PayPal related, that would make sense. I heard that's happened to a few folks, and that's a bummer. I didn't know it was PayPal related. I don't know why they suck so much.
Yeah, I don't know. I know Arms and Armor got hit by them a while ago too.
Yeah, it's dumb. And you can go on eBay and buy a sword and pay with PayPal. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah. Story time. I sold one of the Ryujin custom katanas a while ago, and the buyer put in the notes Ryujin, and I think it was just Ryujin in the notes on a PayPal friends and family transaction. They refused to release the money until for multiple days, and eventually went to the person who sent it and said, we need Ryujin's birth date. And we were just like, utterly baffled about what on earth to put there. So I know we had him put some random date in, and like 3 days later they finally released the money. But it's like, what on earth are you doing, PayPal?
Must have been an early version of ChatGPT running things over there. All right. Going back to my display case, my plan is an IKEA cabinet with glass doors and making my own back that can hold blades vertically in 2 or 3 layers, much like the Wallace and Met ones. I guess I haven't gotten to see the Wallace or the Met, you lucky devil, but I like 2 or 3 deep blades. That sounds cool. So I think you should do that and then send pictures and film the whole thing. And then if I like it enough, I will ask you to build me one.
I agree. I think you should come by my house and just build it here and then leave it.
I'm interested in the Kamakura Nombokucho Iritachi or Odachi, but with Koshi Sori and proper Kashira. This seems like a comment to a conversation that I missed entirely in the chat, but I also am a fan of both of those periods of blades. Koshi Sori is really interesting, and I don't ever see it really done well in a modern blade, at least not from like the Chinese reproductions that I see. Most of the time, Koshi Sori seems to have kind of a wonky shape and it doesn't draw correctly. And if I look at old blades with Koshi Sori, that means that the curvature of the blade is more towards the hilt, so more towards the grip, and that's the deepest part of the curvature. But if you imagine drawing that, that means that like it's going to have it needs to follow the path of the scabbard, which is still made of wood. And if it's going to have all those kind of small, delicate fittings, then the deepest part of the curvature still needs to have some curvature later so that the sword can draw and sheath like a tachi or like a Japanese sword would. And most of the time I see them kind of straighten out and then they bind when you draw them and they feel kind of weird and they don't kind of have that really characteristic deep curve that you would see in some of the traditional ones. The shaping, though, on modern swords is weird. So I think China does a pretty solid job of the 27.5-inch blade with a 10.5-inch handle that they make all day long. And that shape isn't, I don't know that I've necessarily pulled out a Japanese sword that's been the exact same, but like I'm sure the shape could exist in history. It's not so weird. It's friendly to do EI with. It's not ahistoric. It's maybe a little longer than some or a little shorter than others, depending on the period. And it's a little ambiguous, but yeah, but they miss a lot of the like earlier stuff when anyone tries to branch out and do some other shapes, they tend to get pretty weird pretty quick. And Koshi Sori has a lot of things that can be screwed up so that the sword fundamentally no longer functions like a Japanese sword should. And so in fairness, I don't see it done well, even from people that are higher end swordsmiths. It's pretty tough to do those. Pavel Both looked like he made some swords that had deeper Koshi Sori and the right shape, and Rado swords look like they did as well, at least for folks outside of Japan. But anyway, off the deep end there. Kyle, do you know what I'm talking about, or am I just saying words?
I'm following about 75% of it. I'm still learning some of the more detailed things, such as the different types of sori, and I am not good in terms of eras in Japan, but slowly learning. So
I don't know that I'm necessarily great at eras in Japan, and the Scholar General is certainly more of a scholar than I am. But the Kamakura period, I think, is 1200s. I think I'd have to look, but I believe that's the time that like Japanese swords really started to become very characteristically Japanese and moved away from more of the Chinese influence. At least that's what's coming to my brain when I think of Kamakura period. And anyway, different time periods, different enemies, different general sword designs. They all look like katana from a distance, but when you get up close, there's some nuances in terms of the geometry and what they might be. Tachi and odachi are basically, a tachi is like a katana, but you wear it a different way, and they're typically a little longer and used while you're on a horse. And an odachi is a even bigger tachi, and it's I think they're flanking weapons, if I understand correctly, but I could be wrong on that. I never learned to use an odachi and didn't really collect them. But with koshi sori, there's 3 different types of sori. That means the curvature on the blade. Koshi is the near the hilt or near the grip. Tori sori is in the middle, which is probably the most characteristic shape that you see, where the deepest part of the blade curvature is kind of in the middle of it. And then saki sori is near the kasaki or towards the end. So it's a gentle curve and then like kind of flares out. So like a naginata shape might have more of a saki sori, where the curve is really deep, where that big belly is on the naginata. And so what I was mentioning when he says with proper kashira, well, I'm guessing he means the whole koshirai, the whole, like, that's a word that kashira means like the end cap, just the little, the end, the pommel. But the koshirai is like the name for like all the fittings, like the whole mount of the thing. There's the blade and then the koshirai. That's the stuff the blade goes in. So the handle and the hilt and the grip and the suba, the guard, the scabbard, the whole ball of wax, right? So if it has a proper tachi koshirai, a proper mount, right, then it would have all of these little metal bits on it that are holding the scabbard together. It would be lacquered in a particular way. It could be ornate or not, but anyway, there's usually some metal fittings, and you see them in some photos of a tachi. So if you see like the samurai and he's wearing his armor and he's got the loops that go around a belt and the sword is worn blade down, those are typically tachi. And they're also signed on like one side of the blade will denote like if it's a tachi or if it's not. But koshi sori, what I was talking about is if the curvature is closer to the hilt, then if you imagine that you have a really steep curve towards your hilt and then your blade becomes straight. Well, if you put it in a very narrow wooden scabbard, then the tip does like this. If it's straight, it has to pivot somewhere. So in order to make a scabbard work, you have to make something that looks like a boat oar, because the tip needs room to move around, right, to be able to properly draw, because you need your sword to draw and sheath properly in the way the Japanese swords typically do. So yeah, shape is one of the things that is commonly screwed up, and hopefully I didn't just say the same thing as confusing as I did the first time, and it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Falling about 85% now. Sweet.
No, I would like to see in production swords more handachi mounts. You don't pretty much ever see them at least out of Longchuan. I don't recall ever seeing handachi fittings.
Yeah. I think Zisei offered a few, and Dragon Sword might have, but they are particularly rare to see. You don't find handachi very often. Hanwei did some on the Gunto reproductions that they made. Other than that, they're very occasional, and you don't see them done, which is funny because with a longer kashira, a longer pommel area, it would give them more room to glue and like be a little more forgiving of some of the kind of the weird bunchiness that they put in. So like it would work really well with the style of, with the capabilities. They could kind of lean into it a little bit more.
I would guess that would require a different Suka core shaping than they normally do, which they don't want to have multiple types of shapes for the Suka core, I would guess.
I don't imagine it would do anything different. I mean, there might be some nuance to the shape. Like you'd have to, I mean, fundamentally you would grind one part of it down a little bit more to put the cap a little further up. But I guess at least as I understand it, it doesn't seem all that different. Unokomi closed before I could buy a sword.
They are back.
Oh.
Yomikuni is back in business. At least their website is back.
I never got anything from Unikumi. Am I saying it right?
Yomikumi.
Yomikumi.
Yomi. Now I'm forgetting how to say
it. I did see Scholargrim's review on some of the stuff, and it didn't.
Yomikuni.
Now I have to look at their website. This is totally a useful thing to do while you're live. Let's go on the internet and see what they do, because it's not a name that I
reviewed their Warrior Tashi, which that was one of my very early reviews, so it's a pretty rough one. But they had a really beautiful polish for what it was. They had their enhanced hamon, and it wasn't particularly traditional, but it was a very attractive look nonetheless.
Well, I am getting
Yomikuni. There's an extra N in his there's no N between the I and K.
There's no, how do you spell it? Am I going to the right place? This is not.
That's not it, no.
All right. I fail at internet.
Well, what I can say is last I checked, which was probably a few weeks ago, their website was still up. So I would encourage you to look again.
Well, I'm going to Yomikuni Swords. Google is bringing me to the not place. But okay. Anyway, worth checking out. John, what did you want to buy from them? I'm not.
Yeah, it does look like their website's back down. I just looked. So they must have gone out of business again.
They're practicing EI with business, drawing and sheathing, in and out of business. There's an art to it. Do you folks think LK Chen is worth the dosh? I'm going to assume the money.
Yeah,
is what that means. I'm going to guess. I'm not up with all your what your teen speak is, but I'll let you go, Kyle. What do you think?
So I've had a few experiences with LK Chen, and I have a bunch of their loaners in the closet right now that I'm slowly start working on videos for. Short answer is yes. So far, I've had very favorable opinions on them. They've done the Valor Arms recently for Cult of Athena, and the flaws that I've seen with those has mostly been uneven sharpening, which I will blame LK Chen for, but the only other flaws I can think of would generally be design flaws, which was not an LK Chen thing. And when I look at their Chinese swords I really enjoyed every bit of handling that I've had of them so far. And I actually pretty recently released a review of their Striking Eagle, I think it is. It's their really long two-handed Jian. It's like a 40-something inch blade. It's a beast of a sword. And they sent me their 1860 Cavalry Saber to review as a loaner. So that'll be coming out relatively soon. But so far, everything I've seen from them, at the price point that they are a step above just about everybody else.
Yeah. I've gotten only a chance from their European line to take a look at the Kriegsmesser. And I made a whole review on the Cold Steel one and a whole review on the Valor Arms version that LK Chen made. And I certainly think that the LK Chen one was better. There's some little things that I think would be easy to potentially modify yourself. That would improve some of the ergonomics and whatnot. And I think there's opportunity to improve. And it sounds like that's another thing that they're doing is they're listening to feedback and acting on it. So generally speaking, the European ones, the ones that I have experience with, yes, it seemed worth it, especially if I compare it to Cold Steel and the other Kriegsmessers that are available at that price point. There just aren't that many, and of the ones that are available, LK Chen seems the winner. And if they continue to improve, they'll continue to gain ground in that area. The flip side is, like, if you are willing to spend twice as much, I would absolutely recommend something from Lance Connect Emporium over the LK Chen piece. It had a little bit more personality, and it was a little bit more robustly built. Even something from Krieger Historical, I think, felt a little bit more, I don't know, like it felt a little more well-researched and a little bit better in the hand. And I'm only basing that on the examples that I've seen. I haven't seen something that directly competes with the LK Chen Kriegsmesser, but well, the Falk, I guess I did from Lance Connect Emporium, but that was like $1,000 to get one or a little bit more with a scabbard versus under $400. So if you've got the money, then I do think it's worth pursuing and spending more. But if you don't, then LK Chen is, not a terrible compromise. It's still, a very good sword. But the difference for me was like in the grip, right? I know my testing of the Nagel is in dispute of its usefulness, right? Because you may not need to strike it with a polearm. In fairness, the way I tested the Nagel on the LK Chen Kriegsmesser was mostly for safety, because I had to leave the sword in a place and it's long, and so I found a longer thing so that the sword, if it fell, wouldn't hit me. But the Nagel was round, right? So that means that like it's going to be able to turn easier, and it has a little quasi socket that it fits in, that a little groove that it kind of rests in. But in the case of Cold Steel, UPS loosened it up. In the case of Balor arms made by LK Chen, it was loosened a little bit more percussively. In both cases, I could put it back in and like take a nail set and swell it out and try to get it fit back in, but that's just not something that you should have to do. And by contrast, the pieces from Lance Connect Emporium are slotted in with a square peg, so they can't roll so easy, and they're quite a bit more robust. Like it's fit together in a way that, albeit has some cosmetic issues, is gonna like take a hit. The LK Chen felt a little bit like if you needed to use the sword for its intended purpose, other than being a decoration and going out there, if you were to use it as an object to duel with, very likely you would be with a sword in a severe state of disrepair that may debatably not be able to be repaired. It had a very fine edge, and the guard would bend or come apart in such a way that like the whole thing would have to be redone. And the Lance Connect Emporium piece felt like I could fucking go to war with this thing. Like I could punch people in the face with it. I could deflect pikes. I could punch people with their own pikes. Like it felt like really, really solid. And so that's, I suppose, the difference in why, why I say that and why I think it's worth the visual sacrifice that I think you make. Because the LK Chen is actually, the lines are a little cleaner on it. But it's also not a bad sword. Like I did dumb cuts with it and it held up well. And subsequently, I've tested a lot of their Chinese swords to failure. I think that might be the reason they don't send me anymore. But they all, from a steel perspective, generally held up pretty well. There's a couple exceptions to that, and I felt like LK Chen addressed those pretty well. Generally, they were pretty receptive to feedback and wanted to make a good product, and seemed to take any criticisms that I had or quality control issues pretty seriously, and made what I thought were appropriate steps to rectify them. And so, yeah, I do think that they are worth the cash. If you have a sword, universally, they all felt really, really good. There wasn't a sword that I had from them across the, I don't know, half a dozen Chinese variety swords that I was sent that felt bad. All of them felt like they had thought and purpose behind the design. They all felt like they were, like when you pick up a sword like Object, or a sword that looks like a sword but doesn't feel like one, you're like, this is chunky, and it's chunky in a way that it's not supposed to be. Like it's not intentionally chunky, it's stupid chunky. It's because they designed the sword from one angle and like forgot to turn it and like put the rest of the angles in it. And so it feels like a crowbar or dumb or like it's not controllable. And none of that happened with LK Chen. They were all designed well. From a manufacturing standpoint, the only issues that I could really think of are the bronze pommels that they put on were a little bit brittle. It sounds like they moved to a completely different vendor to make them less brittle. It's not a thing that you were supposed to hit anyone with, and that's what I was doing with it. You don't turn around and hit him with the jewelry bit of the sword. That's not what those swords are for, but that's what I did. And the jewelry broke in a way that was premature even for jewelry. And so they've made some corrections there. And then the Song Handao broke in a way that was not ideal, and I believe they've since resolved it, and it was identified, I believe, as a welding issue. So the fact that I can say, like, here's what happened and here's what they did, and like all of that is much better than some of the other swords, because I've broken swords for other vendors and I've been like, this broke and it wasn't good, and they're like, huh, that's it. They don't always get back to me with like, yeah, that's not good, we're going to fix it, like an LK Chen does. And so I think that also says a lot about them as a company. And so, yeah, I think that they're worth the cash, and chances are you will, if you buy a sword from them, it won't feel like a turd Ferguson.
I'm going to go back to the Kriegsmesser, and just for extra clarification, because that one is, they have a pre-order, I think, for it still going, but after this one, that specific model is not going to be available anymore. And instead, the plan is to have a new Kriegsmesser model which is going to be designed by James Elmsley, who is the kind of the guru of falchions and messers, historically speaking. And he's designing the new model for them. And it's going to be produced by LK Chen, from what I know. So that should be really interesting when that comes out.
And that's awesome. Like,
yes.
Those are all the words you want to hear. James knows his stuff when it comes to, well, he knows his stuff when it comes to most things, but certainly the messers are well within his realm of expertise, and getting him to design one seems like, when you say it out loud, you're like, yeah, that should have been the thing that you were doing the whole time. Like, why didn't anyone just ask him to do that? Like, he wrote a book of why doesn't he have his own line of messers and falchions?
Well, he does produce some. I'm getting a falchion from him eventually when he is able to finish it. I'm very much looking forward to that one.
Chris, have either of you held the Cold Steel competition cutting longsword? The stats really make me scratch my head.
Nope.
I believe that's like the remake of the windless
Arbedo.
Yeah. I want to say that I held one and it felt short and heavy, but I might be thinking of the windless Arbedo.
I have not. I think it is basically the Arbedo with, I think they put a much longer grip on it, a longer pommel. And I think they extended the blade a little bit, but no, I have not actually handled it. It's going to be windless, produced for Cold Steel, so there's a lot that could be said about that. Some people swear by windless. I think windless is perfectly capable of making good swords, but they tend to not try enough to do so.
My head got put in a different place with windless when I tested the battle cry pieces, because I test pieces that are sent to me. Like, I guess I don't do it 100% of the time now, but historically my destruction tests have always been review samples that I've gotten, and I don't generally break my own property, but if I get it for free, I figure that's one of the more useful things I can do with it, is show how far it can be pushed after I've shown it doing, hopefully, what it was intended to do. And so I've hadn't tested a windless to that degree until I tested the battle cry Viking sword. And granted, I'm not a huge fan of Viking swords, but when I went to go test it, it snapped at the hilt, right? And it snapped kind of prematurely. And I've taken windless swords apart. I've seen kind of how their tang is designed. It seems pretty similar to what was in the Viking sword. And it left me with a lot less confidence in like the swords from them that I have enjoyed. I like the look of their Type 14 arming sword. It was chunky and heavy, but I always thought like, hey, if I spent a little time with a grinder, maybe, but no, like that's meant to deliver some pretty powerful cuts. and that, breaking apart at the hilt is never a good thing for a sword. So
I think that goes back to what I consider their biggest weakness, which is their quality control. They put, it seems, speaking completely as just an outsider, as a consumer, it seems like they put almost no effort into quality control. And it's a shame because I know they're capable of making good swords. The Royal Armories collection that they did with Matt Easton recently, that they're going to be doing more of soon, they do some really good work on those, but I've seen a lot of people that have quality control problems with them. And one of the ones I ordered had quality control problems. So,
I mean, it's fair when you start charging $800-900 for a sword, then there's a little bit more room to do some of those quality control related items. And I don't know what the manufacturer difference is between the Royal Armories line and not, but I can only say that the Battle Cry item that I tested, which isn't dissimilar to like the Sword of Roven that I enjoyed, or the Type 14, they're all kind of in the $200-300 category. It made me kind of question if I liked those swords anymore, because I really started to, it's like, oh, if that's what's under the hood. It's only one example though, so it's hard to say. Sometimes they just make a dud, but I got the impression that it might not be. If it can be discussed, what happened with the rust on the last Motohara we saw on the channel? I got one recently, and it's simply great. Yeah, so that one went back to Jason at Evolution Blades. He cleaned it up. I got it back, and there was still some remnants, I guess I would say, but I sent photos to the sword friend Carlo, and he was like, that's fine, send it my way. He got it and is very happy with it, and so he's thrilled with the sword. Yeah, and so it's odd. I'm not sure exactly what the issue was. I suspect Jason said it was probably wood dust that gets caught in some of the they're not like open welds or anything, but like the texture on the surface of the steel, because it has visible banding and whatnot. And he said that it's, potentially some sawdust or something from the scabbard. To me, it looked like etch that hadn't been, I don't know how you like make it not etch anymore, but it looked like what happens when etch doesn't get cleaned off with some sort of solution to stop it from continuing to etch. But either way, it got cleaned off to a way that was satisfactory to the buyer. He's happy. And Jason's happy, and yeah. And Jason also said, hey, if he's not happy, send it back to me and I'll make another one, and we'll take this one and throw it in the corner, and we'll get a new one. So I think for what it's worth, the service level that you expect when you're paying $3,000 to $5,000 for a sword from a company is what Jason delivered. It's unfortunate that it arrived in a way that appeared rusty, but his willingness to try to make it right, and if not, really take what is probably a sizable hit and make a brand new sword from scratch, I think really speaks volumes to his commitment to making it right by the customer. So incidentally, when it comes to Evolution Blades, it dawned on me that they do like work on finishing a sword, right? So people ask me all the time, like, who can I get to refinish a sword? And I guess that they offer that service as well. So if you have a bare blade from somebody and you're looking for somebody to mount it up, if you like what Motohara does, I imagine it's not cheap. It probably costs you a couple $1,000s to do, but you have an option from somebody that can take your sword and mount it up in a way that's really quite competent. So worth noting, extra plug for the folks at Evolution Blades. Have you ever gotten a hold of Evolution Blades?
Not yet, no. I have somebody, a sword friend said he might be able to send me one to review as a loaner, and I would be thrilled to have that happen. We'll see. I know I don't think it's done yet. I think he's still waiting on it.
Yeah, that'd be good. It'd be good to see your thoughts on it, especially if you compare it to like a cheap one. Be fun to see. Like I like to do this game with my wife where I hold up like a broken Tsuba from like a Musashi katana, and then like one from an antique that's covered in real gold. Be like, which one of these is more expensive? Sometimes, it's still useful though if you're like, hey, I deal with swords a lot, and this doesn't seem worth it to me. Like I think that's useful. There's a ton of people that aren't practicing Japanese style swordsmanship, but want a good thing, and hear that this is a good thing from people that may have different biases. And if you're like, I just collect what I like, and this doesn't seem worth it to me, I think that's really useful. So hopefully you don't feel pressure to be like, well, everyone else likes them. John, we can do a live sometime. That would be totally fine. I will reach out to you at some point. I enjoy doing these lives, so I will invite more sword people on. Have you reviewed a sword that you've seen somebody else reviewed, or that generally gets high praise from the community that you haven't liked?
Well, the Dragon Sword S7 katana that I had was quite the disaster, and their customer service was, or not customer service, that was a review sample, but their response was less than ideal, and I don't want to trash a company, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. One of my earliest reviews, which was a written review, was of the Windless Stickelstad Viking sword, and I absolutely hated it. There's people that like that sword a lot, and the one I had, the point of balance was like at 8 inches out from the guard, which is extreme even for a Viking sword. And just the entire thing just felt clunky and unpleasant to move around. And I just hated that sword. So like I said, that was a written review. That was before my YouTube channel, so you can't go back you could go back and find it. I'd rather you didn't, because it was a very amateurish review. But that's a good example of one that I know there's definite fans of, and I was not a fan of it.
You mentioned the dragon sword. I won't press you if it's not something you want to talk about, but I'm pretty sure I reviewed just recently. I don't think it's actually out yet. I think I have it on my members thing, but I finished the review of the S7 sword that they sent, and I think they sent it to a few people, and I think that was the one that you reviewed as well. I think it was the same sword. And it's been a minute. I think I watched your review on it, and I recall Jardian's review as well, and they were not very kind to him. That's putting it very, very delicately.
My experience, the Tsuba was loose very quickly after cutting like a dozen water bottles. The Tsuka core had several cracks in it after just that. They told me it was impossible for that to happen. Well, I showed them pictures. They basically didn't respond to that. I did I did an edge retention test on it, comparing it to Romance of Men through hardened katana, and it didn't really seem to hold an edge any better than that one in my pretty amateurish tests. I mean, I have not done a whole lot, very much edge retention testing, so but they did not take kindly to me doing that. They said I am not qualified to do that. I am qualified to judge the aesthetics of the sword. And yeah, they weren't as vicious as they were to Jardian, but combined with their response to him has left me with quite the sour taste in my mouth about Dragon Sword.
I think that's fair. I haven't had anything other than polite correspondence with them, and I've broken a lot of their swords. But generally, the Tsuba wiggling, well, in terms of things starting to come loose, right? I wouldn't say that it happened prematurely on the example that I had. And I don't know if maybe, like, it's always a thing I suspect, right? Like, people know I'm going to use them. So do they like add an extra, does it get a little bit more attention before it comes to me? I don't know. But I trained with that S7 sword actually quite a bit. And so I trained with it like outside in 20 below, and I trained with it when it was 100 above, and I didn't notice anything loosening. In fact, the Ito seemed actually tight and well shaped and overall quite good. And until I started really being abusive with it, then it loosened up. But it also had a copper habaki, and I've noticed that copper habakis, while I prefer them aesthetically, tend to soften quicker. They tend to have I don't know if copper is a softer material than brass is.
It is.
But they tend to get a little bit more wiggly, a little bit more quickly when I move to stupid things. So I did notice that happened, and the copper habaki also like started to shear apart a little bit too, and that usually only happens with copper. I don't think I've seen that happen with a brass habaki. But otherwise I think it held up well. I don't know if S7 is supposed to be particularly great at edge retention. I'm not sure if that's like a characteristic of the steel. It's supposed to be like really resistant to shock is what I understood it to be good at. So like, if you whack it on a tree or something, it's supposed to, take that a little bit better. But I don't know where it stands on the edge retention side of things. In any case, spoiler alert for the review that'll come out, it held up really, really well to doing ridiculous, dumb things. So in terms of edge retention, it seemed to do pretty well. But I don't think I did the same thing where you were being a little bit more specific about what you were trying to test. And I think you were whacking it on like a 2x4 or something, and then evaluating it with paper cutting or something else.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah. They, with the Suba coming loose and the Suga core, they said that they think it got impacted during shipping, and that's what caused it. Well, I disagree because it came in the standard Longchuan foam packaging, and it looked flawless. So if it was impacted enough to cause that kind of cracking, I think the foam would have shown it.
I would venture a guess that's the case. I would suspect it's the humidity, if anything else. And honestly, like a crack is not ideal, certainly, but it's also
multiple cracks actually.
Yeah, especially if you feel it, like if the Nakago, like if it feels like it's moving around, it's not ideal to happen. Certainly does though, and I would say it happens on most of the swords. Like if I think across from Sky, apart from I don't know that I've seen it on a Huawei. I don't know that I have enough examples to really say confidently that that's the case. Don't see it on Evolution blades or most of the custom blades. But just about anything out of China, with very few exceptions, a crack handle is something that I see from most vendors. Like not every time, but like the Hanwei Kami katana. I've had a few of those. Like of the 4 or 5 that I've had, 2 of them have been cracked.
I don't want to give the impression that it was just an absolute garbage sword either, because it wasn't. There was some stuff they did very well. Like I know you were saying the habaki wasn't as durable as a brass one, but the fit of the habaki to the blade was beautiful. The mounting overall was very nicely done. They actually used hishigami, which you see very rarely. The fittings were nicely finished. There was clearly attention to detail put into it, and it was reasonably sharp out of the box. And not the sharpest sword katana I've gotten. Honestly, a little less sharp than I would expect from China katana, but still functionally sharp. And I think it would have been a good training tool if it didn't have the problems I had. And then, like I said, the real problem for me was their response to
being a dickhead.
Yeah.
Where does that as a buyer, right? Because like when you do stuff in a review, there's a little bit to unpack there. I'll talk about it in a second. But like as a buyer, if you don't like the person or the company like, but you think the product's good. Like, how do you spend your money? Does that impact you, or do you like?
That absolutely impacts me. I will not be buying something from Dragon Sword because the company has left a bad taste in my mouth. I just don't want to give them money after the way they berated me, and I'm not confident I would get a good product either. I don't know if they're petty people or not. They could be not, but I don't want to risk them being petty. I'm not saying they are, but if they are, they could easily give me inferior product for the money.
Yeah, you don't want to risk it.
Exactly. Okay. There's plenty of other katana makers out there that I would rather support.
Yeah, that's fair. As a reviewer, then, like, where does the company having poor customer service, to put it mildly, right? Well, I don't know about customer service, but like because
public relations,
they probably have some customer service related things, but most companies do. In this particular case, though, Jardian got a review sample, and they were less than kind to him, like sending somebody a review sample, and then when they give negative feedback, telling them that they, like not saying thank you for your feedback. And then when you're passing, like, they send you a sample and then effectively, like, don't trust what you have to say in return. How do you balance that? Like, because you want to try and be objective, right? Do they have the ability to criticize too, right?
Right. And absolutely. It's all about presentation, in my opinion, and tone of, it's not tone of voice, it was all written communication, but how you present it. I am open to criticism. I try to make that abundantly clear. If people have criticism for me, I want to hear it because I want to get better at what I do. So if they were going to take my criticism with the honest intention of providing good feedback that it was, and give me feedback on how I could do a better, could improve my way of generating that feedback, I would absolutely be open to that. But they were aggressive from the start. As soon as I provided any kind of negative feedback, they were aggressive right away in defending themselves. And it's two completely different companies, but I can't help but compare that to the way Romance of Men and the Desticin have taken feedback, which has been with incredible grace and a desire to improve, as opposed to saying, we are right, you are wrong.
Yeah, that is fair. Unfortunate too. I think there's an assumption that I have when I work with a company, right? That there's a certain decorum that's followed when you're working with a customer, and I can understand that, like, a company, probably a small shop run by somebody. Chris is in the room, right? Chris is Sterling Armory, but Sterling Armory is a small place, and Chris is one. If I was just like, hey, your swords suck, they don't. But if that's what I said, Chris could certainly say, hey, thank you for your feedback. I'll try to improve. Or you could be like, fuck you, idiot. Like, these are great, right? But if you were to say Chris makes shitty swords, and then, and I'm sorry to pick on you, Chris, you don't make shitty swords. But if I were to say, Chris, you do this, then because it's him as a person, that's like, I don't know, it has a different vibe. But if I say Sterling Armory does this or that, then there's like this assumption that comes with customer service and a product and a company and this kind of faceless entity that we don't expect to get vitriol back from. And I think Dragon Sword is likely, I don't know for sure, but I think it's likely probably a pretty small shop, and they're responding defensively to critiques of their wares in a way that, is not ideal. I think when somebody sends something out for feedback and then gets it, we like to think that like it'll be taken with grace and with, you know, the assumption of positivity, like that we're trying to give you honest feedback, which you solicited by providing a sample. Yeah. At the same time, I can understand why they wouldn't, because they're probably just a person that's very defensive about their work.
Well, that's why if I have criticisms, I always try to make sure I also point out things that were done well. You know,
Yeah.
like I said, Dragon Sword, they did some stuff very well on the katana that I had. And it wasn't a terrible katana, it just had some problems. And the problems were exacerbated by their response.
Yeah.
It's not that it's a shitty company. I don't think they're necessarily a shitty company. I think they have shitty public relations with people who disagree with them.
Yeah, that's it. That's a bummer too. And you equated them to Romance of Men, and I too have been getting a few samples from Romance of Men over the years, and consistently they have taken feedback. I think I've been polite in my delivery of the feedback, but I don't know that I've held back on anything that I found an issue. And over that time, they have taken it, made honest, you know, questions back, not to tell me I'm dumb, but to like further explain and ask for like, well, what's better, and like honestly seeking like, hey, how do we do it? What's the definition of good? Can you show me? And because I like blabbing about swords, I've certainly done that, but they've also then acted on it, right? Like I can't remember. It's like the definition of an asshole is people that constantly ask for advice and then never take it. So they ask for advice, but then they take it, right? That they're in the not asshole category.
Yeah.
Consistently over the last several examples that I've had, they've shown a marked improvement on each iteration. And there was a lot to improve on the first round, and the last one that I got from them, I think we'll have an opportunity to maybe talk about it together in the future, right? But it's certainly a step in the right direction and much better. But if I compare the Dragon Sword at equivalent price to the Romance of Men at about the same price point, because I've reviewed, you know, $125 sword with like an extra $30 upgrade, so that puts it at about the same price point as the most recent Romance of Men version that I've talked about. The Dragon Sword was a little bit more refined, like checked more of the boxes. So would you rather have a sword sold by somebody who's trying and is kind and takes it with ease, or just a dickhead? It's going to be me. I'll make you your fucking sword, you jerks.
That's an interesting point, especially because as a reviewer, we have a different perspective, because we actually, especially with review samples, end up talking to the company more than a customer ever is going to. You know, the buyer, a lot of buyers couldn't care less about who makes the sword. They just want the best bang for their buck. So it's a weird, it's inside baseball system, to use one of my my pastimes. That they as a reviewer, we have a different perspective than just a consumer, and it's hard to put yourself back into the buyer's shoes sometimes, especially when it's a review sample, because it's not your money on the line. Sure, you can try to think about it as, I spent whatever amount of money on this sword, but you didn't, and you can trick yourself a little bit into it, but you don't really have the same feelings about having spent that money. Why, when I have a review sample, I always frame it as, would I be happy spending this amount of money on the product I got?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to do it. As a reviewer, it's tough to put in or not, or like how much, like where does it fit, right? The same problem happens with Cold Steel, because some people have some objections to the former owner, Lynn Thompson, right? He's certainly a personality, and is very open, or at least has been open with some of his hobbies and interests, and they don't always align with what people think is morally appropriate. So is that something you put in when you're talking about one of their swords, or is it really like not important? And I mean, as in review, like, you're trying to help somebody decide how to spend their money. So anything that might influence how they spend their money then becomes important. But it seems off topic sometimes. I always feel weird when I have to talk about drama stuff. I don't particularly like it, and I don't know the best way to like provide it in a way that's useful, because I'm not super interested in it. So I tend to hear some stuff, and then I'm like, hey, there's some stuff, but that doesn't seem helpful.
Yeah, that's why whenever I get a review sample, I try to provide. Whenever I do my review, I write about 4 to 5 pages of notes of things I want to cover, and I take those notes and I, take out the notes that are just, don't forget to say this in the review or something like this. Just my actual feedback, and provide that to the company. So I usually end up giving like 3 pages or so of notes to when I get a review sample. And I sit there and I'm like, all right, let's make sure the wording on this is not how worded to myself. I want to present it as neutrally as possible, rather than, I'll make personal notes about how I want to talk about, or the tone of voice I want to use, or the, a colloquialism that means something to me, to take out that kind of stuff. And I always welcome the maker to, respond to any of the notes I have, and I will include them in the review, because I think I don't want to be one-sided. I want them to have a chance to respond, because maybe they're going to improve. Maybe it's a one-off mistake. Who knows? I want them to have a chance to respond. And the companies that I think have done it well have generally said, you make valid points and we don't need to respond, or our response is going to be, we will try to make this better. And then Dragon Sword was basically arguing with me on every single negative point. And it's like, so I included that. I included their responses to me and said, this is what they said. Make of it what you will.
Yeah, John is noting he shared his issues with the Dragon Sword, and they took it in stride. And that there's some language barrier there. I don't know if he has translate set to angry mode, if there's like a Google Translate like condescending bar that gets ramped up. I'm not sure. It could well be, though. There's not just a language difference, but I could certainly see somebody in the US, right, that sells their wares under a brand taking deep offense to somebody critiquing their work. And it's not something that is surprising, right? That like they take it personally. It shows, I think, if anything, that they care about it a lot, right? And want to see it represented well. At the same time, I struggle with, like, you send out a review sample and then get mad at the reviewer for what they have to say. That's
yeah. I mean, they have to. They need to acknowledge there's a risk when you send a review sample, or even if you not a review sample, if you just sell something, there's a risk that people aren't going to like it and they're going to make their opinion heard. It's not just review samples, but it's true of us reviewers too. We put ourselves out there. There's going to be people who hate on us.
There definitely are. Yeah. Fortunately, it hasn't reached critical mass on my side yet, but it certainly.
I'm still small enough that I only get a few random people.
Yeah. Have you been told to die from cancer of the ass yet?
Not that one, no. Okay. I've had more of just the general insults.
That's how you know you've made it. Somebody is wishing cancer on you. That's how you know you're really doing the good work. Any thoughts on Taisuke?
I don't have any experience, so really my only thoughts on them have been from watching your reviews of them, honestly.
Yeah,
And
Taisuke has been, yeah. So I reviewed 2 Taisuke swords, 2 different of the same model, and both had very similar issues. And I mean, there's a long history with Taisuke. In fairness, some of their more base models, I had them before I did a lot of video reviews and sold them, but I actually like the KTN like 2 and 3. I thought they felt pretty good in the hand, and I didn't notice the same issues with those models. But the 2 reviews I started with were higher end Sanmai folded. It's from their, $2,000 or $3,000 line of swords. And so they had some issues. I posted the reviews, didn't, moved on with life, and then went to Thailand on a family vacation and said, hey, can I come out and meet you at the forge and say hi and make swords? I know I bitched about them, but I still think they're cool. So I got to meet the owner in person. We chatted about swords for a little bit. He was very gracious with his time because my schedule was a little weird while I was bopping around Thailand with a child in tow. Anyway, so then some years later, I was like, hey, review. If you want me to do it, let me know. They opted to send me a review sample, and it went the way it did, right? There were a number of things, and I'm not entirely sure which way it's going to go. I still don't know if they want me to send it back or if they're just making another sword. But he did ask for a lot of feedback. I sent a lot of photos. I sent a lot of additional ideas. I'm like, hey, if I were spending $3,000 on this, here are some of the features that I'd like to see, and here are some potential ways that you can do it, and here's some things that I've done on custom swords that nobody else seems to do, and maybe they'd be useful. Have at it. So I don't know if they're just making another sword for me to review, or if they want this one back. I'm a little fuzzy. There is a little bit of a language barrier there, and I'm not due another fancy pantsy sword, but they seem to take the criticism reasonably well. And I critiqued a few things about the shaping and on the Nakago in particular, and pretty quickly on their website, or on their Facebook anyway, I started to see pictures of, hey, the Nakago, now they're pretty looking. I was like, great. Like, that was one check. So it seems like they are responding to feedback, but at the same time, they charge Motohara level prices, right? And if you ask me which one would I rather have, the Taisuke is technically more feature rich in that it comes with some sort of advanced lamination technique and folding. If those are things that you like, then the Evolution blades won't have that, and nor will the Citadel at the same price. So they are a little different in that regard. But and there's more silver, probably by weight, on the Taisuke blade than on the Evolution blades or Citadel likely. But every other thing is better on either of those companies. So so that's it. I think they charge a lot of money for something that isn't playing, doesn't check as many boxes, isn't playing in the same league as the other competitors that they're playing against. And in that $3,000 price category, Evolution blades really only stands out as the one, and they're not infallible, right? I talked about one where it came a little rusty, right? But I would still say that rusty blade would be one that I'd rather have than the if either one of those were in my hand, I'd rather have the Evolution blades, rust and all, than the heavy on silver Taisuke blade that came with the issues. So hopefully that answers the question. Hopefully, Kyle, you get a chance to experience both of them, and all at the same time too. Just get a Citadel, a Taisuke, and Evolution blades, a really high-end Hanwei. You can evaluate all the $3,000 sword options out there.
What's the market on kidneys? I'm
not sure, but I think they've held up well with inflation. So I think you probably want to keep them as an investment, if anything else. All right. Super budget branded Forged Warrior. Surprised at the quality. Would love to see some reviews from you two. Forged Warrior. Never heard of that.
I'm not familiar with that name.
Yeah, never. That doesn't inherently mean bad. Every time I do a live, which is frequently enough, people ask me about 5 different brands that I've never heard of, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they're good, but I haven't heard of it. Andrew makes a good point here. If every individual sword is different, yeah, there's a lot of variation from quasi handmade goods, and they all can be different. Angus Trim, I remember him talking about like removing, God, I can't remember what it was, but it was like thousandths of an inch across the surface of a sword, and like the total weight impact would be, probably less than a gram. But that is enough to make a difference to him in dynamics, right? So if you assume that somebody's like a little heavier or lighter with the grinder, that could make a difference, significantly more than what Angus was talking about. So yeah, they all can be different, but they're also how, I think that's an appreciable difference for sword nerds, right? Like I sit here and I hold out, I hold swords and I think about them and I like the weight and I pontificate about it. And but I think a lot of people would probably pick up even all of the bamboo mats that I've had, and the variation in weight is like half a pound. And I think most people would pick them up and be like, yeah, they feel about the same, even though to me that's a huge amount of difference. And the people that are really into swords, that's too wide a spread, but
well, it's like the kind of the gold standard for standards would be Albion in European swords, and every Albion of the same model is a little bit different because they're all, they come from blade blanks that were CNC'd out, but then they were hand ground to final shape. So there's going to be differences in there, there tend to be relatively small differences, but they're still there, and every single one is a little bit different. So it's just, if they're handmade, they're going to be different. That's just all there is to it.
What about Skydro? I'm still waiting on mine, but I have high expectations. Is that because you're smoking the weed? You've capitalized high. Have you played with the Skydro?
I have not, no.
Well, you'll have to let us know what you think, Bird. Again, Samurai Bird, also sword reviewer, rambles on the YouTube sometimes. You should check out his channel and rambles. Skydro, I know, is also known for taking a long time. They have that in common with Huawei, and I think they make good swords. For some reason, Skydro seems to get a fair amount of hate, and I don't exactly know where it comes from. They don't seem to be ridiculously priced. There are levels to ridiculousness in terms of pricing scale, and Skydro doesn't seem to be on the top. They're usually a little bit more expensive than other folks, but like in the same ballpark at least. And they tend to check a lot of little boxes. Like Ito tends to be a little bit tighter. They make their own kind of custom fittings, so you don't see like the same parts bin stuff that you see everywhere else. The shape of them changes a little bit, not a huge amount, but a little bit. And a lot of times things seem pretty right and tight. I've had problems with them binding in the scabbard a little bit, but not so much that it makes it, useless or terrible to practice with. And I would say though that like they have an entry level sword style, and when you go up to around $1,500, I think that's like where they stop making sense. Because I've gotten a chance to see one of their like super high end $3,000 swords, and I would equate it to Taisuke, in that it was nonsense in terms of the price point that it was asking for. It wasn't really. It was fit together worse than their $1,500 swords, and I just couldn't. I didn't understand how more money but badder. Like words good that broke my brain. I was because like Taisuke kind of tries to step up the game a little bit and misses the mark with their higher end stuff. The Habaki's good. They, I'm not sure where the miss is, but like the KTN, the lower end ones were a little righter and tighter than the higher end ones. So kind of similar, but with the Skydero, the $1,500 Kumo katana was awesome. I thought that it felt great in the hand. It looked really pretty. It had like a folding pattern on it that looked distinct and not like something that was made of the same steel that LK Chen uses, and this pattern that you see on a bunch of Chinese swords. And then all of a sudden you spend twice as much as that or more, and it gets like worse than the $300 swords. So I don't like that. That I struggled with, and when I was talking to the owner of Skydero, we really didn't seem to see eye to eye. And in my feedback on their like exclusive high end stuff, but when I think of their $300 swords, I thought that they were pretty solid, and I really enjoyed the Kumo katana. And I have a scallop around here. It's up there. I can see it now. But I think that they make, generally speaking, good stuff. And if you can wait for them, they're worth it. I would struggle though. I would probably choose a Huawei blade over a Skydero. And if I have a long ass wait, either way, I think if I had like $500 to $800 to spend, I would go there. If I wanted folding and that kind of thing, the Kumo was also an excellent sword, and I really, really like that, particularly the one with the bohea. I did a review on that one, and I thought it was spectacular. I kind of regret selling it, actually. It was too short for me, and I was like, Kyle, just like you're like, I want to keep ones that I really love, but then like sometimes you don't know you love them until they're gone. Has that happened? Have you sold one like, shit?
Yes. There's a Jeffrey Robinson, I don't remember what, I think he called it an executioner. It was based off a Albion Moat blade that at the time didn't fit the sense of style I was going for, and I sold it, and I really shouldn't have that. I look back and I look at the pictures of that sword. I'm like, why the hell did I sell this? This sword was gorgeous. I love Jeffrey Robinson's work. I love his sense of style. I was stupid to sell it.
I have a katana with fittings from him. It's kind of an obscure thing. It's in a bear theme, and it's
I've seen that one on his website.
Yeah, it's a strange one, but I have that katana in my collection with Jeffrey Robinson bronze fittings on it, and it's a weird one because it was made by Chris Zhu, but I can't validate it. I have no reason to doubt it because the guy that I bought it from, I bought, you could say, a few swords from, and they've all been exactly what they said they were, and all from high-end makers and all from the time period, and no reason to doubt, except I can't seem to find Chris Zhu and be like, did you make this sword for this guy, please? So I haven't been able to validate it, and he didn't sign it. So anyway, but point is, the blade that it's on is made from like a high-end maker in China who won a contest in a forged in fire kind of, not quite the way you think of it now, but before that show was on, there was a Masters of Fire event in some blacksmithing competition, and he won it. And so the guy was impressed by that, ordered a sword from him, and I had it polished. It looks beautiful. He did a very solid job on it, and has Jeffrey Robinson fittings on a katana, which is uncommon, but also really weird fitting because they feel like not traditional Japanese fittings. Not that they don't work, but they are.
I mean, there's not much traditional about these fittings either, but I love his sense of aesthetic, and the bronze itself. I really like whatever formula he uses for his bronze. I think it just comes out looking great.
Yeah, I do agree. He does a pretty solid job. I don't know that sword is untraditional either, though. As I look at swords in museums, at least some of the stuff that survives, maybe it's not the typical, but hilts and whatnot could be quite a bit more ornate.
True.
A lot of examples weren't, but it seems like there's a lot of examples of really cool, decorative, ornate stuff too that you don't see represented as much in the reproduction side of things. I'd like to see more of that. Like, more casting and carving and stuff like that in the sword furniture. Anyway, if you could change one thing in the, I realize we've been blabbing about swords for 2 hours and probably should wrap things up. So I'll ask some final random rambles. If you could change anything after reviewing all of the things that you've reviewed, is there any advice that you would like, you just wish manufacturers would take? Consistently fucked up across the whole industry. Everyone, God damn it, fix this.
Across the whole industry?
Lots of offenders. It doesn't have to be the A players, but
here's one. Typically speaking, in medieval swords, the polish the higher the polish, the more expensive the sword, the higher the polish. You would see a mirror polish on a nobleman sword, for instance, and in the reproduction market, it's satin everywhere. There's a few makers that do a mirror polish, although I don't really like the way they do their mirror polish. But I would like to see not mirror polish everywhere, but I would like to see some of the higher end sword makers do mirror polishes, because you're paying multiple thousands for a sword, for a high status sword, but the polish is a satin. And not that I dislike satin. I don't dislike satin. I think a good satin polish is absolutely beautiful. But if we're talking about historical, people back then loved showing off their wealth. If they had wealth, they wanted to show it off. And a high polish took a lot more work with the tools that he had, so it showed off well. And I think it would make sense to see some more variety than just standard satin everywhere.
If you could review any sword, just pull one from any manufacturer or collection, what would you like to get your hands on, apart from the Kaer Morhen?
Well, I'm going to go with this. There's a I never know how to pronounce it. Cincadea. One of those pizza cutters, people call them. It's like a really short sword that's really wide. It's like a type. Yes, thank you. One of those was just posted on Facebook today by a guy named Ugo, I think it is. I don't know. I never actually had heard of him before. But it had like this camel bone grip, and with that type of sword, it had like around 20 fullers and had all this beautiful inlay and engravings, and it was just that sword is over $10,000, I'm sure, and just absolutely loved it. But aside from that, I just had the real thought of something from Peter Johnson. That's what I would love to review. Oh, anything from Peter Johnson.
Yeah, he's very approachable. He's like a super nice guy for being like a sword celebrity, right? Like,
I've chatted with him a few times. Just really nice guy.
Always generous with his time and knowledge, and he seems like a very genuine, nice guy. I would like to get something from Peter Johnson too. I really like his aesthetic, how he does things, and his approach to things. I think he makes special stuff. Yeah. I don't know. Many years ago, I was asking about him making something, and he wasn't opposed to the idea, but I don't know if he has time now. He's certainly kind of elevated his craft a little bit, and I don't know if he's too busy to take I don't know if he's taking commissions and stuff now or not.
I would hazard a guess that he wouldn't be opposed to it, but it would have to be something that really caught his interest. I think it would need to be something. I mean, anybody who has the money who knows the swords would love to have something from him. I'm sure. So it's not like he needs the work. His time is his most precious commodity, I'm sure. So
I have no idea. Honestly, that might be that's, if it's not true, what an unfortunate assumption, right? Like, Peter Johnson's the guy that can't get any work because everyone thinks he's too busy because he's, so awesome. That would be so sad, right?
Well, I know Albion is desperate for him to help finish several new models. So I know he's got work waiting for him there.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, it'd be really unfortunate though if he's like, "Hey, does anyone need a sword?" I'm so nobody. It's like
Yeah.
the pretty girl that never gets asked out on a date, right? Like it's out of my league. I couldn't bother Peter Johnson. Like I want to eat. I don't know if that's the case. Probably not, because I've seen some of his artwork sell for what seem to be pretty crazy prices, and good on him, right? Like they're awesome, but at the same time, it does make me think like commissions probably not in my future, even though I'd really like one. His works also really come up extremely rarely. I of the many people that make swords, it seems like people don't part with his.
Not surprising.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the same time, look at all the cool stuff that you've bought secondhand, right? Like there's awesome works of art there that were really special ideas to people, or the craftsmen that, kind of willed them into existence, and you were able to, people parted with those, right? And Peter Johnson wasn't always the sword celebrity we know him as. Well, he always was Peter Johnson. I don't mean to say like his name used to be Sam, and then he had that's not what I mean. But he didn't used to be so famous in the realm of making swords, but he's still making swords, right? And over the years I've been interested in the hobby, I really don't see his work come up for sale secondhand.
I can only think of one, which was one of his Reflection series swords, which was selling for around 25,000, 30,000, something like that.
Yeah, I think I've seen one. The same. Who's the other one? The gentleman from Temple Forge. I can't remember his name, but also really great stuff. And Patrick Barta, is that it?
Yeah, I think that's who you're talking about. And I think it's generally the same person selling them too.
Yeah, and those all look really fantastic, but also, they don't seem to come up in the secondhand market very often. And like you'd think, guys making swords all day long, like somebody's gonna get it and be like, I like Coca-Cola memorabilia now. I'm getting rid of my swords. But nope, it doesn't seem to hit the radar, at least as I see it. There's a few of them. Peter Johnson and Patrick Bart, I think, are the ones that have been at it for a really long time that I don't see. David Delagardelle too. I guess he's made a lot of swords. His Mad Dwarf works I've seen come up every now and again, but since he's been in Cedar Lore Forge, pretty infrequently. But there's another guy who's making swords a lot, and like you'd think it's like full-time occupation, makes swords, but doesn't come up on the secondhand market.
You want another one that doesn't come up on the market, which surprises me, is arms and armor swords. You rarely see arms and armor swords on the secondhand market. They show up from time to time, but compare them to how often Albions get sold or Angus Trim swords get sold on the secondhand market. And for every 20 of those, you might see one arms and armor sword, which seems crazy to me. They're around the same size as Albion. I think maybe a bit smaller, but not a lot.
Well, I've toured both spots, and Arms and Armor, in terms of like I believe is smaller, like a smaller shop. Definition of considerably is tough, but like I think they might have a similar number of people that work for them, but Albion is a little more automated, right? But yeah, I've been to both. Arms and Armor is local to me. They're like I get a chance to go see them from time to time, and I'm very lucky to be able to do that. But I've gone through Albion as well, and they're like, it looks small when you see them, but that it goes like really far back. It's not a small building that they're in. It's deceptively large. But anyway. I would venture a guess that Albion is a bit bigger, but Arms and Armor has been making swords longer than Albion, considerably, and both shops make swords all day, right? Like that's what they do. Arms and Armor make some other things on top of swords, right? But you similarly don't see like, it's not like pole axes from them come up every day, or spears or flails or, you know, daggers and stuff. They make that stuff quite a bit, but like to your point, it's stuff from Arms and Armor is not super common on the secondhand market, despite the fact that they've been doing like making stuff professionally as a manufacturer for more than 2 decades. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of it. I think of them as like kind of coming up often enough, but you're kind of right in that that's not very frequently, given how much they must produce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a rarity. They're not, you know, they're making swords fairly often, and I can think of in the last couple years, maybe 5 or less that have come up in the areas that I frequent. I can think of 2 that are available right now, which is actually 2 more than there usually are.
That's a fair point. That always baffles me when I think about the size of the sword market. Because, I mean, like, you look at YouTube, we have 20 people watching the live right now about 2 sword nerds blabbing. So there's people certainly interested in the hobby. But if I look at the scale of sword manufacturers, right? Like, you have shops like Arms and Armor and Albion and Dark Sword Armory and a whole bunch of others, LK Chen, you know, lots of people just making swords all day long, right? And then on top of that, you have a bunch of other manufacturers making swords all day long. And you look on eBay, and there's just a huge amount of swords. And I've gotten a chance to talk to a few people that distribute swords, and like one vendor that I talked to says they move like more than 10,000 swords a month, right? Wow. This is like one vendor. And so if you think about that, like the market is so big. It's so big. And the people,
it's so big that the communities are small.
Yeah. At the same time, like I don't know people that just have one sword outside of martial arts folks that just have one tool. But like the people that must just buy a sword to like be like, yep, now I have a sword. This will go next to my hockey stick. I don't play hockey. Next to my golf clubs that I also don't play. Next to my, like, I don't know who's buying them. I mean, I can only buy so many. I'm responsible for roughly 200 of those, but that's. But anyway, yes. Well, we've babbled enough. I appreciate it, Kyle. I will wrap things up here. Special thanks to Kyle for joining me in this late night ramble session. I appreciate you sticking around and blabbing with me this Friday evening. Thank you to everyone in the chat for being here and keeping the conversation lively. And I'm sorry I neglected you for the most of it. Hopefully some questions were answered. Kyle, any closing thoughts?
No. Have fun with swords. You know, if you don't cut with them, you should try it at least once, because I never expected to cut with my swords, and then I tried it once, and I was hooked immediately.
Yes, cut with your swords. Happy sorting. All right. Cheers, everyone.